Do we start at 7 sharp or do we start now? Should we, should we start now?
No, Arun, the time is 7, so we'll wait till 7.
Okay, great.
Thanks, sir.
ঠিক করলে মিউট হয়ে যাবে, মাইক হয়ে যায়। ওটা যখন কাটা থাকবে তখন মিউট, আনমিউট। তোমার এটাও এই যে এটাও তার কেটে দিতে পারো, স্টার্ট ভিডিও। ওটা কিন্তু চিরজিৎ চৌধুরী হিসেবেই আসবে, বলতে অনুসরা চৌধুরী আসবে না। কারণ তোমার ল্যাপটপ তো না, এটা তোমার নিজের ল্যাপটপ হলে ঠিক আছে। এখনো স্টার্ট হয়নি। এসে গেছে। Mute yourself. কোথায় mute আছে? আটটা থাকলে mute করলে।
Arun, you may start the session.
Okay, great. Good evening and a very warm welcome to all in this discussion on this wonderful book, Travel Culture, Travel Writing and Bengali Women. This book has been written by Professor Jayati Gupta, who has spent her career teaching in the Department of English at the erstwhile Presidency College, Lady Brown College, University of Calcutta, and WB State University, amongst others. Her recent publications include an interview with Kalyani Thakur Chahar and the Aesthetics of Dalit Literature, a case study in Dalit text aesthetics and politics reimagined, and Creating Spaces and Identities, 100 Years of American Travel Writing, in Essays on American Literature and Art, Multiple Perspectives. She also translated stories from Bengali to English for a collection of partition narratives. This book chronicles travel writings of Bengali women in Kannauj in India and explores the intersections of power, indigeneity, and the representations of the self and the other in these writings. It documents the transgressive histories of these women who stepped out to create emancipatory identities for themselves. We are in discussion with Dr. Sharwani Guptu, who is a professor of Asian Literature and Cultural Studies at Netaji Institute for Asian Studies, Calcutta. We welcome you all and we hope that you will enjoy this wonderful session. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Arun. Welcome, Professor Jayati Guptu, Jayati B.
Thank you.
Travel accounts have formed an important element in the reconstruction of the history of India from ancient times. The accounts of foreign travelers into India have been fully documented, and what still awaits completion is the documentation and analysis of Indian travelers to other countries. Much of these accounts are in the vernacular and needs translation, which is recently being done by scholars like Anand Yan, Michael O'Sullivan, amongst others. Professor Jayati Gupta's book, Travel Culture, Travel Writing and Bengali Women, 1870 to 1940, is an important intervention in this regard. Indian women traveling within the country on pilgrimage has more or less been accepted socially throughout history. Though before the colonial times, they hardly ever wrote anything themselves, even though other contemporary documentary sources have references about their travel. With the spread of Western education, ease of communication under colonial policies, development of printing press, and start of literary periodicals in Bengali, awareness of foreign lands, reading about travels in them became an exciting pastime for both men and women. It is therefore not surprising that once women started traveling for secular reasons, most of them followed their husbands. Sometimes they went to study abroad, as well as pilgrimages, of course. They also shared their unique experiences with their fellow countrywomen. Research on women's travels has for a very long time been focused on the imperial gaze, on intrepid European women travelers to exotic places in search of social freedom. In the past few years, the reverse is also been studied, but the concentration is more on migration studies. Exploring and writing about Western countries by colonial subjects has been very rarely worked upon, and Professor Gupta is definitely a pioneer in this field. I would like to end my preliminary remarks by talking about a little bit about the style form that is used in these narratives. One is that many of these narratives are like letter writing in the form of letters written to relatives back home, which creates for the reader an enjoyable narrative style where they are a part of an audience. The other form is in the form of the other style is in the form of a diary, where the reader appears to journey with the writer. Though one shouldn't forget that invariably these narratives are written later when the author's agenda through deliberate omissions and elisions are made. In no way can one underestimate the importance of these women travel narratives in understanding the different aspects of the society of the time, both at home and abroad, and most importantly, to me at least, how a world is created through literary means where women bond across nations and cultures. They are visible to each other, understand each other, and by relating their experiences to others, probably women readers as well, empower them through creating awareness. And this is what we will discuss today through our discussion, Joy Didi. I would love to welcome you with a question that we have read so much about men traveling throughout the periodicals and lots of books on men traveling. But where are the women? When do they start traveling? Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Thank you, Sharmade, for setting the tone for the entire discussion. Yes, we hear quite a lot about men traveling, and we read men's travelogues. Men's travelogues from Bangla have also been translated, but the women are just not there. One of the main problems about that has been that throughout the Western world and everywhere, I think we can have the first, slide, that cover slide, the painting. So, what has happened is that women were never, put into the forefront. And if we are looking at colonial Bengal, then it so happened that, the women were stereotyped. Women were thought of as belonging to the home and the Antapur, almost like the Turkish and the Persian harems. And that is how, in Western travel writing, especially by women, mem sahibs, that is the picture that we got of, these women. But women did travel. And let me go back to the previous slide, please, not the railway reforms, the previous slide. It's actually in the folk narratives. It's in the Mongol Kappos. It's in the Moymunching Gitikas, Purbo Bongo Gitikas, that you find, Indian woman, Asian woman, Indian woman in this case, traveling. And this, cover picture, which I've used, actually captures that. Look at the palki. look at the dinghies in the, forefront. And these are women who were going perhaps from the Bapir Bari to the Shoshur Bari, which is the most common form of travel, just as pilgrimage is another form of travel. The travel was there, but it was just a motive. Travelogues were not there. So this is the book cover. I've chosen it specifically because it gives such a beautiful scene of, woman being there, traveling in the dinghy and in the palanquin. Yeah, palki. So that is, where we are looking at it.
So
Yeah.
So when do they start writing?
See, the culture of travel was there, but the culture of writing was not there. And that depended on a lot of things. First was, of course, women's education. So if we are looking at Bengal, which was a pioneer in this, women's education began in 1849 with Bethune School. And 2 years before that, 1847, there was this school in Barashat, which was a set up girls' school in Barashat by Kali Krishna Mitra and Pyari Charan Sarkar. The Kali Krishna Mitra school still exists. So, and higher education for a woman started in 1879, which was when Bethune College was set up. That was the first Asian women's college. So, education, so we have to factor in several things. So education was one. The second was, and there was a lot of opposition, orthodox opposition to education. The second was, let us have the railway, slide, was, the coming of the railways, the middle of the 19th century and 1853 or so. And at that point of time, a woman, it was difficult for women to come out of the Antapur and travel. And there was a lot of public discourse among men about, women traveling. And one of the first things was, how can they travel with men? That was number one. Number two was, what are they going to wear? Because in the Antapur, the clothes that they wore or the saris that they wore, that was not, something which with which they could travel. So, and the other, point which was raised by very, very orthodox people was that why do they need to travel? Before that, their minds have to be prepared because otherwise they won't learn anything. So, prepare them, their minds while they are through education, etc., while they are inside the Antapur, and allow them to travel only much later. So there was a lot of opposition. But there were the railway reforms, separate compartments for women, European lady guards, the men would be accommodated next to, in the, adjoining compartment of, adjoining carriage of the railway train. These were made. And obviously, this helped travel. The third thing, which, led to women writing, of course, was, with education, there were these Bengali periodicals which started to be published. So publishing the Bengali periodicals, these made writing travel for women easier. It was still, if there were 20 travelogues by men, there were only 5 by women. And usually they published serially in the journals. And then later on, these were published as books, self-published in most cases. And the women, in that sense, were still largely invisible in the, field of travel writing as such. So, that is the broad scenario from which, we actually begin for Bengal. So I didn't get any travelogue which was before 1882 or so, for foreign travel or, written travelogues, maybe short pieces here and there. I would like to go to the next slide. That's the Puthi. This is this is not by a woman, but this is the earliest travel narrative that I have read, which is a Puthi in the Bangio Sahitya Parishad. It's called Tirtho Mongol by Bijoy Ram Sen. And it's a fascinating, short narrative from here, Kolkata, to Kashi. But I wanted to show you the picture of the Puthi because it was so exciting to see it. So men's travelogues did come out. Women's travelogues, were written and came out much later. So that is the publishing scenario for a woman and writing for a woman.
Thank you, Joy. Now, of course, we have to go into the book as such, where you have fascinatingly divided the women writing the travelogues into 3 sections. Those traveling to England, Europe, and those traveling within the country or around the country, and of course to Japan. Was there any particular reason, before you go into the details of the work, I was wondering, was there any reason why you divided it in this, structured it in this manner, or is it because of the availability? And a second thing that I was wondering is, what about these women? I mean, they are all broadly middle class educated women with some slight differences, variations, and that must be reflected in their writing as well. I mean, as and when you discuss these women, do bring in these aspects as well, because they are so interesting.
See, when I started researching on travel from Bengal, I found, there was a lot of material. I was quite overwhelmed by the material, men and women. And then among women, I found that several of them, went on these pilgrimages. Even, Debendranath Tagore in his autobiography talks of his Thakuma, Dwarokanath's, wife, having, gone to Dwarokanath's mother, having gone on these pilgrimages. And, every time Debendranath would cry. Then there is Keshav Chandra Sen's mother, who talks about the Brahmo preachers with whom, she traveled. So there were a lot of pilgrimage travels. There were a lot of intra-country travel. And, when selecting, I had to, make a choice. So when selecting, I chose, travelogues by women, which in, searching for the self and encountering the other, were also, looking at the nation, nationalism, the uplift of women in their own country. If they traveled, they felt, and they had a little bit of education, they were writing. So they felt that they were privileged in some way as compared to those who were still, so-called caged and imprisoned in the Antapur. So, that is the time when I thought that, it must have a theme. I couldn't, carry all the travelogues or all the translations. So what I did was Bilet, was a major kind of a place where most of the men from Bengal wanted to go to. It was the metropolis. It was the capital city of the imperial rulers. So they wanted to, go there. women did not always accompany them. They went for professional reasons. But women started going. And let us have a look at the next slide, that list of women who went westward. All right. So, there were these westward travels. And I selected from there those which I found, most relevant to the theme that I had chosen. Then from there, I found that there were also, traveling within India, especially to northern India. And when I'm talking of Bengal, when I'm talking of India, we are talking of undivided Bengal and unpartitioned India. So we were talking of British India at that point of time. And they traveled far and wide. And wherever they traveled, they were still, trying to think about the nation. So, that is the section Aryabhatta, Travels in Aryabhatta, the second section of my book. And then I found that there were travelogues to Japan. And of course, Rabindranath went in 1916, 17. Before that, Manmothanath Ghosh had been there. So, there were, men's travelogues, but women started going there. And maybe Horiprabha Takeda, of whom I'm going to talk later, she went because she married a Japanese person. She lived in Dhaka. She married a Japanese person. And so she was going to a Shoshubari. But for the others, they were traveling for particular reasons to see the culture and the society of Japan. And so, that was another section. And it was a culture which was old. And they were trying to modernize themselves. They were not colonized, but they were trying to modernize themselves and take a role as a pan-Asian, nation. So, that attracted me. So, those are the three sections: westward travels, Aryabhatta, travels in Aryabhatta, and Japan as a site of travel. So, that is how I divided the book. And here I have a list of travelers to Europe. That is the first section that I'm going to talk about. I haven't included all of them. Let's go to the next few slides which show the pictures, because I have used maps in the book. I haven't used any, portraits. So this is on the left, there is Rajkumari Banerjee, who went to England with her husband, Shoshipada Banerjee, in 1871, 70-71. And she is supposed to be, one of the first, well-documented woman, but she didn't write anything herself. It's her son who wrote about, her going there. They were invited by Mary Carpenter. So she was taken so that she could represent in some ways Indian womanhood. But she didn't speak at any of the meetings to which her husband went. So, there was this idea of the white woman's burden, and she was there. But what I would also like to say that I haven't included her except in the introduction to the Westward Travels. She is in her sari, and she gave birth to a son. And Mary Carpenter wrote to Queen Victoria saying that the first Hindu child was born in England, and he was called Rajkumar Albion Banerjee, who, in his own way, he became famous in India. The other one is of Toru Dutt, who didn't leave a travelogue. She had many letters, but that was a Christian family that we are talking about. So England and France. Let's have the next slide. And here we have Gyanodha Nandini Devi. Gyanodha Nandini Devi, again, she didn't leave a travelogue. It's her daughter who wrote about the reminiscences of Gyanodha Devi. But why Gyanodha Devi is important is that she is the one who brought about the sartorial reform that made women, enabled women, let us put it that way, to travel outside the Antapur. So let's have the next slide. And this is Shuniti Devi, who went for Victoria's, Jubilee. And she was a Maharani of Kuch Bihar, daughter of Keshab Chandra Sen, obviously, well educated, well trained, and that all the etiquettes of Western society she was, acquainted with. So both Ganoda Nandini Devi, Shuniti Devi, they come from the upper crust of Indian woman, Indian society. Let's go to the next slide. And this is Abula Bose. I'll have occasion to talk about Abula Bose, wife of Jagadish Chandra Bose. So this, next slide, please. Yes, Krishna Bhavini Das. This is the first full-length travelogue published in 1885. She went in 1882 to England, accompanying her husband. But in the case of Krishna Bhavini Das, she was educated by her husband at home. And she was writing in Bangla, of course. Now her book has been translated also. But, she has a very interesting, and I'm going to read two excerpts, therefore, from her writing. Here, this is the only portrait that we have. There are no pictures whatsoever. And she is in her widow's weeds. She came from Baharampur, and she was married to Devendranath Das, a Kolkata family of lawyers who went to England to study. And then, went in 1882 for the second or the third time and stayed there. Krishna Bhavini accompanied her husband. She was ostracized by her Shoshur-bari. She was not allowed to take her daughter there, Tilottama. The daughter was married off at the age of 10 when she was in England. When they came back, she was still, not allowed to, get into the home or to meet her daughter. So she didn't come from the same, you can say, class in that sense of the term, though, they came from an educated zamindari household. So she didn't come from the same class, and she was tortured because of that. But the most interesting part of it is all the women that you have seen, up to the very end. And I would say, even when my mother and grandmother traveled, they were always traveling in saris. They didn't, adopt the Western dress. But Krishna Bhavini in 1882 was wearing a dress. And it was not easy for her to adopt that. And I'm just reading from the text. It's a translation of Krishna Bhavini. But there are no pictures or other reports except for her saying this. I sat on the deck, book in hand. A barrage of thoughts coursed through my mind. Bharatvarsha, land of my birth, Calcutta, friends, relations. One by one, I kept thinking of them all. I had parted from them, and they remained each in their places the way I visualized them. But in these 4 days, I have come so far away, and things like my diet have changed so much. If my mother saw me now, she would probably weep, thinking that I had become a Christian. If my siblings saw me now, they would not come running, calling out to me, Didi, and wouldn't even dare to hold my hands in case they lose their caste. If other relatives see me, they're likely to tease me for being a Mem Sahib. But nothing has changed in my mind. Though I'm no longer the veiled woman, though my diet and dress have become westernized and none would recognize me as a Hindu female, still I feel the same loving bond with my mother and my father, my sister, my brother, my relatives and neighbors. And if I were to meet them now, I would run and hug and talk to them. So, and then she ends at that excerpt that I have used, then she ends with these words. Maybe they believe that a change in dress entails a change of mind as well. So, there was this kind of, she had changed. She had, gone west, but it was against the greatest odds that she was doing it. Before I go on to the next section, I would, also like to, look at a very, very short passage from here. Let's have the next slide anyway. It's this awareness of diversity within India, which led me, this is Durgabati Ghosh. We'll come to her much, much later. But, look at the woman in front of the Egyptian pyramids. The extreme, right is Durgapati, but there is another lady in the Parsi sari, wearing the sari in the Parsi style. Let's go to the next slide. Now, when Krishna Bhabini was traveling from Kolkata to Bombay to take the ship to England, she was passing through many of these states. And then she says, so she was coming for the first time, she was coming in contact with the diversity of India. And she says, having been born in Bengal, when I heard or read about people in other provinces of Bharat being of different statures and habits, I could hardly comprehend the fact. But today I'm witnessing it with my own eyes. And she talks of Allahabad, she talks of Jabalpur, she talks of Maharashtra, and she says, this is, wherever, when she's traveling by train, she is looking at, this diversity of people. And then she talks about the dress, etc. Then she says, I was so surprised to see such diversity within the same Bharatvarsha. It occurred to me that if a Bengali, a Marathi, and a person living in the Western province travel somewhere abroad, none would think that all three of them belong to the same country. So that awareness of nationalism, that awareness of diversity, but still belonging to that same country, that comes across in the 1880s. And these are, some of the, these nationalist sentiments, the Indian National Congress coming up, and then the Satyagraha, the Swaraj movement, Quit India movement, so this is so the 80s, 1880s to 1890s, the first part of the 20th century. This was a time when intra-country travel, because of the railways as well, became, extremely important. So that is Aryabhatta, that. Let's go to the next slide. Yes, I didn't find the title page of Prashannamoy Chaudhury's Aryabhatta, which is an 1888 text, which I have used. And next slide, please. Yes, Prashannamoy Chaudhury. And then, I have a map from map of Kashmir. Can we go to the Kashmir map? Where it's in Bangla, Kashmired Manchitra. And this Aryabhatta was this northern India. There are descriptions of that, or what it entailed, from the Himalayas to the Vindhyas. That is the span which is taken in. It included, to a certain extent, Nepal. It included Lahore, Peshawar, all this, which was part of the Indian subcontinent. Let's go to the next slide. So, these are the travelogues that I have used. Hemlata Sarkar is the one sitting in the middle. She wrote this Nepali Bongo Nari, 1911. And she, her, travelogue talks about the journey to Kathmandu. And that was in a palki-like with children, in a palki-like contraption called the carpet. And how dangerous it was. So, that is the description which I've included in the book. And she was incidentally the daughter of Shivnath Shastri, and she set up the Maharani Girls' School in Darjeeling when her own daughters were not given, admission into the Loreto convent there. So, and it's called Maharani Girls' School because the Maharani of Kuch Bihar, the Maharani of Darbhanga, and the Maharani of Bardhaman helped, setting up that school. Let's go to the next slide. And this is Shanta Devi. I've used her, travelogue. Shanta Devi and Kalidas Nag. They went to Peshawar. That's the description that I have in the book. And this is on the verge, if you look at it, limit of British India. So after that, it's Afghanistan. So that is where, so that is the Aryavarta that, I'm talking about. And Prasanna Moyi's travelogue, Aryavarta, has been used. And there she talks about the syncretic nature of the culture of northern India, the Islamic and the Hindu. And that is our secular India. So that's, the Aryavarta section. Sharbani, do you want to ask me something in between, or shall we go on to the next slide?
We'll hear Japan and then come back again.
Okay, so let's go to the next slide. So that is a Bengali woman in Japan. Horiprabha Takeda, as I said, she was from Dhaka, but she married, a Japanese person who was, working in a soap factory over there. And she went in 1912. That was her Shoshubari visit. In 1924 again. And in 1941, that's when the Second World War had begun. They were repatriated because they were Japanese citizens. And that is the point at which Horiprabha Takeda also had these, Bengali announcements for Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose on Tokyo radio, INA. And those are some descriptions which I couldn't but include over here. Obola Bose, I'll talk about her later. But, next slide, please. And you can go through the next 2 or 3 slides. This is Horiprabha Takeda. The next slide, again, Horiprabha, with her husband. Next slide, please. I had only this picture, and then Sharbani told me that that's not the young Horiprabha, so I took this picture. So from the Wikipedia Commons, so it's, little blurred. Next picture, please. Next slide, please. Yes, this is Saroj Nolini Dutt, wife of Guru Shodo Datta, who went to Japan in 1928. Now here, next slide, I don't know what is the next slide. Yeah, and Shanta Devi in Japan. Now, when talking about, Japan, the point was over here that all of them were seeing in Japan traditional culture, which was trying to adapt to the Indian, not Indian, to modernism. And I'm going to read from Charubala Mitra, about whom I haven't been able to get any biographical details, but she visited one of the girls' schools. And there is this critique, very interesting critique of colonial education, to which they were all used in India, because at that point of time, we had this British form of education. And she says, there is a fundamental difference in the teaching methodology of girls' schools in our country and the system of teaching here, that's Japan, which cannot but be apparent to an onlooker. Though girls may be educated, they do not have the opportunity to learn from their school curriculum how to weather the storms of a domestic and competitive public life, nor muster strength to stand against them. But isn't that true education? So, that was one point that she made. And then she talks about the memorizing and the number of books. And she says, after a few years, girls burdened by the dead weight of books emerge from schools half dead like skeletons. I cannot fathom what the value of such education is. If memorizing a few books is the only end of education, accompanied by a breakdown of health and mental depression, can we not do without such learning? And, this is still so relevant in our country. That is what, amazed me. So that is the Japan travel. Now I think, the slideshow is over. So Sharbani, you can ask me any other questions which you have.
Yeah, so innumerable questions are coming to my mind, but of course, we will have to leave a little time for the audience questions as well. But there are two questions that I want to ask you, which the first of all, what is there a difference, a class-based difference in the style of writing? That is, I don't know how far this is possible, to for you to talk about, but also during whatever I have read of these narratives, during the sea travel, at least, this class bias seems to come out a lot. And not so much when they are traveling there, perhaps, outside India, that is. That is one thing, though they are all middle class, but the fact that they are educated and the fact that they, most of them are staying in the first class cabins, and compared to the deck passengers, that kind of a differentiation appears to come, especially in the sea travel, during sea travel. That was one question. And the other question that really strikes me is how to these women, other women seem visible. We in the men's travels, there is very little mention of human beings. It's much more about their ideas or what they are seeing, sightseeing and things like that. But in women's travels, other women are very, very visible. So I don't know if you'll agree with me, but I hope that you will comment on these two.
Okay. Class difference was there, but all of them had, a kind of basic education. Of course, Shuniti Devi's travelogue, it's actually from the autobiography, that was written in English. So she was, very, very privileged in that sense of the term. Krishna Bhabini, and there is another lady who was writing, that is Jagat Mohini, whose text is a very, very, the only text that I found in the National Library is, all broken apart, but I try, I salvage some parts of it which are translated. She was a Christian and she was a widow. So the way in which, as you said, sea travel, the way in which she traveled unchaperoned, unlike, all the others in that sense. And she says that she had, British lady who was with her on the ship and who helped her quite a lot to, survive that sea travel, as it were. So she was traveling alone, which was, remarkable in those days. And for the others, they were all to a certain extent privileged travelers. In the Japan travels, I find most of them were of the same kind of class. They were going to the same kind of places, especially the girls' schools. So there were, there is a kind of sameness about it. When we are looking at travels in Arjabhakta, there is again, some kind of difference. And Prasanna Moi was more privileged than, say, Nonibala Ghosh. Of course, Shanta Devi was privileged enough. That. And the most interesting thing is that in Arjabhakta, 1888, It's a, the Bengali is very beautiful. It has not been, the full text has not been translated. And she's talking about the woman's gaze and the men's gaze, which in 1888 is quite a remarkable thing. So, the way in which women saw the world, even India, that was very different. So, she talks about that. And Obula Bush, she was into institution building. So, she takes a lot of pride about attending Jagadish Chandra Bose's lecture, etc. And then she says that she, took special interest in the Royal Institution because she wanted to come back to India. On all her travels, she says that she wants to come back to India and build institutions. And the Bosho Vigyan Mandir, she says, very definitely was built through the inspiration that she had on her travel. So, that is a part of it. Krishna Bhabini was a social reformer, etc. But she was, as I said, she was ostracized. What she wrote about, yes, she writes quite a lot about these women. The 2 chapters that I have, translated are about English women. But the most interesting, section is in Durgavati Ghosh, where she talks about, again, she's privileged. She is the daughter of Girindra Shekhar Bosu, and she was going with her husband. She doesn't name her husband in her entire travelogue, Paschim Yatriki. And they were going on a Thomas Cook tour, right? But it was again, looking at Britain, British institutions, etc. One of the things that she says, I don't have time, so I'm not reading that extract today. She says that, okay, I've heard quite a lot that British women are extremely hardworking. But now that I come over here and I, look into their kitchens, look into their homes, what I can see that there is a reason why they are hardworking. I'm not saying that they are not hardworking, but you can't compare it with Indian women because the climatic conditions are better and the home conditions. And she talks about, women in the kitchen in India. And she says in the joint families, everyone eats at one particular, they don't eat together. So the entire day the women spend in the kitchen. Number 2, there is this Amish, Niramish, changes and, that chua and not chua kind of thing. So that is what they have to observe. So there is no discipline as such. So it's much easier for the British woman to, be hardworking and do so many things. And here the conditions are different. So, that's again a very, very, you can say, astute comparative analysis, which no, male traveler could have done. Because she had access to spaces, or the woman had access to spaces, which are not the same. So, that is also, quite important. Right. Does that answer your questions, Sharbani?
Didi, just before I hand over for the audience questions, can I just ask you one final question, which you can answer in one line? What is your next project going to be on?
See, here, because I had to select my travelogues, I have the next book coming up again with Routledge UK, where I'm going to use pilgrimages, travels to other countries, also by women. So travels to other countries like Norway, Germany, Italy, USA. So, that is the, next project that I'm working on. So, yes.
Can Arun continue with the questions?
Certainly. There are 3 or 4 questions over here. I think most have been taken up in the discussion, but there are specific queries. One is by Mr. Devashish Gupta, travelogues of by solo female travelers, which you have already spoken about and is there in the book also. That is one issue they would like you to speak on. Then about the travels of Dr. Kadambini Ganguly for her education abroad. If there's
Right.
some light you could throw upon that. And the dietary issues which you just mentioned, that Niramesh or Amisher Kothaka. So these are the issues, if you could maybe elaborate on them.
What was the first question again? I didn't get the first question.
Solo female travelers, any travelogues by them?
Okay. Solo female travelogues don't happen this early. Except for, as I said, Jagat Mohini Chaudhuri, whom I've used over here. She was this widow, this Christian widow, who, traveled to England alone. But none of the other travelers that I have been looking at have traveled completely alone as such. So they didn't travel as early as this. They would either travel with their husbands or their fathers or their family. So it wasn't, completely alone. Even in Aryabhatta, Prashannamoyi was traveling with her brothers. She was ill and her brothers were taking her for a Hawa Badul. So she was traveling with her, brothers. So solo travel, I think, solo travel as you understand it, begins much later. And the other thing which I would like to mention over here is that, for our Indian, woman travelers, they were not trying to prove like the, Western woman, say, Alexandra David Neal or Mary Kingsley in Africa and others like that. They were not trying to prove anything about their intrepid, transgression of gender norms. Here, all the women were extremely conscious of the fact that they were Bengali women. They, they were, a woman who belonged to the home and to the household. And what they were trying to see is how the condition of women in general in India could be improved, their own, self-fashioning and that of the woman. So, it was a very different kind of a mindset with which they traveled. So as early as this, no, they weren't, travelers alone.
There's one comment that about Gyanodha Nandini Devi traveling to England with her children to meet her husband there, to join him there. So
yes, she traveled alone.
Yes.
And she was highly pregnant at that point of time. Yes. She had her daughters, and Prasanna Kumar Tagore, took charge of her in London. And then, yes, she went to, Brighton and set up her home before Rabindranath on his first visit and Satyendranath arrived. Yes, that was once when she was, traveling alone.
So, and the other question is about Dr. Kadambini Ganguly when she traveled abroad for her education.
Yes, Kadambini Ganguly, I haven't really probed into. She didn't leave a travel account. I was basically looking at travel accounts. Yes. So she didn't talk herself about her travels. Yes, she was in Edinburgh. It must have been difficult. How she traveled, where she traveled. I haven't really, got the details for that. So, it must have been, a difficult time for her as well, where she was trying to qualify professionally. And she was basically alone, traveling alone. So Kadambini Ganguly, I have not, really probed into her travels.
A lot was definitely better than Anandi Joshi's lot, because she was forced into what she was doing and she was tortured by her husband when
yes.
she traveled abroad.
Yes.
So,
and I think, there was another question on travelers from other areas, yes. Other, states of India.
Yes.
Now, the problem over there is that much of the women's travels would be in the local languages, vernaculars. I took up Bengal because I know Bangla well enough to read the originals. Travel in other parts, from other parts of India began a little later because women's education and women's, coming outside their homes was little later, because I tried in Karnataka museums and archives. I didn't find any women's travelogues. Nothing that is translated and nothing that is there. But it is not as though people didn't go.
Yes.
That's another project. If from other states they start talking about it, then we can see how the women's travels compare with each other. But that's a massive kind of work, as it were. Right.
The
There was
other
one
question-
other question from somebody about the dietary issues that these women had when they were traveling. That is also.
Yeah. Krishna Bhavani tells you that she's changed her diet, etc. There was Jagat Mohini who says that it was difficult for her to travel, and there was some pickles and that kind of thing which she would pick on. Otherwise, she wasn't able to eat what was there on the table. I'm sure for Shuniti Devi it was not a problem, and for the later travelers like Durga Bhuti or Shanta Devi, etc., it wouldn't have been a problem. But yes, there were dietary problems, and Durga Bhuti has this I think it's in her travelogue that she talks about how she took a lot of tinned food from here, but the tinned food all actually at that point came from England. But she took a lot of tinned food on the voyage because she thought that in case she's not able to eat. And on these ships in those days, the food that was served was quite a lot, as they described that. So yes, there were some dietary problems as such. Yeah. Anything else? Any other questions?
There is one more question about Dr. Sarojini Chatterjee, later Naidu, who traveled to England for her studies. Is there anything you can say about that?
Who was it?
Sarojini Chatterjee.
Yeah, Sarojini Naidu went abroad. She was given this honorarium kind of a thing, or a scholarship, and she did go abroad. But again, she came from a well-to-do family. It was basically for a study. She didn't leave any travelogue. There are some letters which can be accessed. Yes, Sarojini Naidu did go, and there is a mention of that, I think, in Probashi or Bama Bodhini. There was this note which says that this is the year that Sarojini is going to study abroad, and there were many others who did go abroad. I have used some of them, but I haven't translated them here.
I think that about wraps it up. All questions have been addressed. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for making this so interesting. And as you said, if people from other parts of India start researching their archives and come up with other travel logs, that is what will add to the entire mystique of this travel by ladies when they were supposed to be restricted to the hearth and home. It will be really interesting. Thank you very
The
much.
other thing, Arun, which I just want to, put up over here, I don't know, but many of our old families in Kolkata could have or would have, travel journals or letters, which, you can just take out and, read or, have them, published, because it creates, kind of archive of women's travel, and it was so very important.
It is,
Yeah.
it is,
Thank you.
it is very important. Thank you. Uh, Thank you very much. And with your permission, may I now move with the vote of thanks to all involved?
Yeah, thank you very much, everyone, all our listeners and the Calcutta Club, and Sharbani, of course.
Yes. And thank you, Professor Gupta, for bringing us these really interesting travelogues. We are transported back in time and gain a perspective into the lives of these women who swam against the tide. Thank you, Dr. Gupta, for engaging us with your insightful handling of this discussion and keeping the audience enthralled. Thanks are due to the President and the IT Committee for providing the virtual platform. Systems team consists of Debashish Nath, events team KG Rao, library Ms. Piali Goin. Library subcommittee members. Add in Penatus for creative e-invite and welcome slide. Thank you all very much. And I take this opportunity to inform you all that the next program on virtual platform will be on 30th July. It is the proposed book launched by Dr. Kunal Sharkar in conversation with Dr. Shandeep Chatterjee and Pradeep Gupta. 31st July, our 7th August virtual book launch, Tales from Faraway Lands, author Dr. Amitabh Chaudhary in conversation with Dr. Anjan Chakraborty. All these books are now available in the library also, and all our members can access them if they so like. Thank you all very much.
Yeah, host, you may close the session and the recording. Thank you all.